See, life doesn't always go as planned. Often doesn't go as planned. So when life unfolds exactly as it's going to unfold, that's the flow of life, and it's either pleasure or pain. So if it's in line with what we like, it's pleasure. And if it's not in line with what we like, it's pain. So if you're eating food and it is good, according to what you like, then it is pleasure. And if the food is not good, then it's pain in the moment. And if Google says no signing in this moment, then, assuming that's not in line with my preferences, then that's pain in the moment. And the people on the other side waiting for the broadcast, sitting there, and there's a blank screen. No pain in the moment for them, assuming they would like to see a broadcast. So life is always pleasure or pain, depending on your circumstance. Depending on your preferences and the circumstance you find yourself in. And whether it is pleasure or pain is not a defining factor on who we are at our core. This is the key to human happiness. That if things don't work out, it's not the end of who I am. It doesn't actually touch who I am at my core. With things not as we like, if we drop in, we'll find I am. Here I am. It's a problem if we feel what I am is defined by what happens next. So if we find ourselves opening our car, sitting in the car, turning the key, and instead of hearing the sound of the engine, we hear click, 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 then that's pain in the moment. We would like our car to start, and we realize we left the lights on, and now we have a flat battery. If we feel defined by the meeting that we were going to have, which we're now going to miss, then that situation is an attack on who I believe myself to be. And the feeling inside is of resistance to life, which is attacking me. Now, life can be attacking me through the actions of another person. It can be seen that I'm self-sabotaging my own success by doing things that deliver negative outcomes. So I can feel attacked by myself and my actions. Or I can just feel attacked by the universe. Why is this happening to me? And if that's the case, then the whole process starts. And the feeling is uncomfortableness. And that uncomfortableness in its different forms, different intensities, is human suffering. And what we're really intuitively seeking in life, whether we realize it or not, deep down, we're just seeking for the end of this uncomfortableness. And as I mentioned yesterday, we're seeking it through a whole lot of things, thinking that that's the solution. We probably aren't even aware a lot of the time that we're just seeking the end of this uncomfortableness. What we are aware of is the outer feelings of the uncomfortableness, and the outer feelings of the uncomfortableness says, this will go away if circumstance is a certain way. So we try to fix circumstance all the time, try to control circumstance. But deeper down, we're just looking for the end of the uncomfortableness. The only problem is that we've got a wrong formula, an incorrect formula of how that uncomfortableness is going to be addressed. The formula comes from the feeling that tells us what the solution is. The feeling itself is an error. Uncomfortableness with oneself comes from a wrong idea of oneself. So if we take instruction from the feeling, we're taking instruction from an error. So we're going to be seeking in the wrong place. So this is important to know, to just understand the dynamics of what happens. Is we forget ourselves, an idea of ourself gets put in place, life unfolds, it attacks our idea of ourself. That attack on the idea of myself arises in the form of an uncomfortableness with oneself or the other, ultimately an uncomfortableness with oneself. That feeling informs me, remembering that feeling is an error, that feeling informs me of what the solution is. And it just gives us the wrong information, the wrong conclusion. But without knowing that, we follow it. And then we wonder why we still haven't found the solution. And the answer is simple. We've been following a formula that has been given to us, each by the feeling, thinking it's accurate, and in fact it's not. So we've all heard, our happiness isn't to be found out there. Our happiness isn't to be found in the other person, isn't to be found in circumstance. Our happiness is to be found inside. And the solution that's given to us is fix out there. So at some point, the working mind needs to become equipped with this understanding. When I find myself completely involved in how to solve my life, and there is this feeling of uncomfortableness present with that, just check what activity I'm engaging in, and see if I'm engaging in an activity that's trying to fix the external circumstance in order for my happiness to be there. And if we check and that's the case, then a thought from the working mind might arise and say, actually, my happiness is never to be found out there. And that thought can cut off the obsessive thinking and behavior that's trying to fix out there. What happens if that thinking gets cut off, there's a place that we can find ourselves, a place that we rest. We can call it the heart, the spiritual heart. It's a field of being that exists prior to, during, and after the thinking. A field of being that exists before, during, and after any particular activity. And it's the very core of who we are, And it's fair to say that for a large part of our life, maybe even our whole life, and when I'm talking about this, I'm generalizing primarily for people who haven't come across spiritual teachings. Because spiritual teachings remind us that there is this place, this field of being. But until we come across spiritual teachings, and really there's very few people in the world that are exposed to spiritual teachings that are direct enough to start talking about this place of being. They're not direct enough because people aren't ready, really. They're not receptive to hear this. And a few people in life are receptive to hear that there's another way of living outside of our head. And so if we don't hear this, then life is lived inside of our head, which really means that whenever life is happening, we're looking at what's happening and we're judging it as good or bad, that it should or shouldn't happen, feeling or assessing what this means to me. And that stream of thinking, living in this stream of thinking, means we only know ourselves as this idea of who we are, defined by outcomes. And so we then hear, no, there's a place outside of thinking, outside of the spectrum of thinking, which is where you can know yourself, where you can rest, where when this resting happens, there is peace. This place, its very nature is peace. And we're given hints, because I'm sure many of you know that once the power of that, or the momentum of thinking has started and gained enough speed, sometimes there's absolutely no comprehension of life being lived outside of that space. So often when we hear even these spiritual pointers, it's heard and it's only assumed that there is this space of thought, this spectrum of thought. And so the thinking starts to figure it out, or it tries to figure it out. The thinking starts saying, okay, so where is this space of being that's being spoken about? And it'll never be found by thinking. If thinking is trying to find it, it means we're in the spectrum of thought. And so at some point, a stop has to happen. And feeling in the body is a very important component of this stopping happening and a dropping into being. What this means is we have to start feeling and not just thinking. At some point, when I was being directed, I realized I've lived my whole life in my head, unaware that there's this other capacity to feel things. So if someone said to me, "How are you feeling?" I would go up to my head to find the answer to that question. So I'd say, "Yes, I'm feeling very good. I've been having a good day." And one day I realized I'm not answering the question. How are you feeling? And I'm giving an answer that I assess in the situation is the right answer, let's say, depending on what I want to convey to the other person, what strategy there is in the mind about what I want to achieve out of this interaction. And I realized that the answer to the question was never really informed from a place of actually knowing the feeling. So what we might like to try is opening our gaze up, which means allowing the whole of the present moment image. We'll just work with sight, the sense of sight. Just opening the gaze so that the whole room fits into it. And you might notice that you've got peripheral vision, which means, you can see that there's something there, but it's not very defined. And that's okay, we're not focusing on anything in particular. Just allowing the whole experience to be there. Already allowing everything to be there without trying to change it makes us present with the experience. So it's harder for thinking to become the center activity. And at the same time of having the soft open gaze, and when you have the soft open gaze, you might notice that the body, which we're always convinced is the subject, is actually an object in the experience. So I can see hands of a body moving. But when I say I can see it, it doesn't really inform me that it's being seen with the eyes. That's an assumption, from our past way of relating to what life is, that the eyes see. But my experience is that there is an awareness that is the subject. And the awareness doesn't stem necessarily from the body. We've always assumed that the body is what sees. The body is what experiences life. That's a belief that has been deeply ingrained that needs to be challenged from your own experience. And just challenging the belief can loosen the experience. So in the teachings of Nisargadatta Maharaj, which is an awakening teaching to this consciousness that is the true subject, in the teachings, one of the most repeated concepts is you are not the body. You are consciousness or awareness. And so when we hear this, I'm not the body. I'm not the body. And if we trust it, and so it depends on if destiny inserts a faith, in a sense, a trust towards what we're reading. I know in my case, when I read certain texts, there was something inside that says, this is something I need to know. This is something that I'm going to trust for the time being. Not blind faith, in a sense. It's a trust that's just enough where I am interested in hearing more and investigating for myself based on what is presented. So we have to challenge this idea that I am just the body. The body is not the subject. The body is an object in the present moment experience that the true subject, which is right here, right now, the true subject is aware of. So with this soft open gaze, not focusing on anything in particular, realizing that what is seen arises in the field of awareness, That is a given, that whatever is seen must be accompanied by awareness in order for it to be registered. So awareness is ever present whenever the daily life experience is here. You can't have a daily life experience without awareness. Now, awareness doesn't mean how aware are you. This is something that tends to be implied, that our awareness grows. Awareness doesn't grow. Awareness is ever present. Awareness is the very functioning of consciousness that allows experience to be here. So even if you have the most contracted experience, disconnected from self experience, awareness is fully here, aware of that contracted experience. So awareness doesn't develop or grow. It's complete and ever present in every moment. And when awareness lands on itself, which really means awareness, instead of only becoming aware of the object, for the first time sometimes, that's the awakening, and like, wow, I never realized it was here. Not as a thought, but awareness, instead of obsessively just looking at objects, becomes aware of the function of awareness, which is always here. And so when that happens, that's one of the key aspects of the realization. It's that, awareness has always been here. It's the basis required for there to be experience of any sort. You can't have experience without awareness. And we assume it's the body's awareness. What's being suggested is you are not the body. You are the awareness, and the body arises as an object inside awareness, as part of the experience that arises in awareness. As we go further, we can start from our own experience. If these awakenings start to develop, we'll start to realize, and the content is not separate from the awareness. That the content and the awareness are interdependent on each other. So it sounds like, the way I'm talking at the moment, that there is a background of awareness, and then all of the content is inside this background. And that's useful for hopefully a recognition of this awareness to happen. But as we go on, we realize, they're not two. Awareness and what it recognizes, even though the words imply a separation, actually, that's just because we take the words literally. If we come to the experience, we see, in my experience, awareness and the objects are not separate. They coexist, they're interdependent. Without awareness, there would be no object. With no object, there would be no awareness. They're not two. If we say there's awareness without object, then what we are implying is that there is a duality, ultimately. So, that's another story. The awareness is ever present in each moment. And if the mind is trying to get it, that's the obstacle. So I haven't got to the part of dropping into our heart yet. With this soft open gaze, allow the center of consciousness which is so used to being localized in our head, as if it's seeing through the eyes. Allow it to drift down. You don't have to do the drifting down. It's just like it's being pulled down by gravity. So it goes to the back of your throat, and then into the upper part of your chest, and then rests more or less in the center of your chest. So with the soft open gaze and allowing the center of consciousness to drop into your chest, instead of necessarily being kept in the head, we might find it's much easier to just allow everything to be, and for us to be. The heart, the spiritual heart, which is sort of in the center of your chest, maybe a little bit to the right, as Ramana would say, but not this far on the right. So making a distinction from the physical heart, more or less in the center, in my experience, we can say is home. It's the junction point where impersonal consciousness of Source links to the body. And at that junction point is the sense of I am. And so when we rest here, that's the very core of the human being, the lowest common denominator of the person. And it's the meeting place of the impersonal. And then on the other side it becomes, so there's the impersonal, the meeting place where the impersonal meets the body, I am, and then it becomes much more colored with personality. So if we rest in our heart, it's the closest place to knowing the impersonal. And once again, if we're thinking about this, the thinking is what's keeping us a little disconnected. There's nothing to do here. All tasks that you might need to achieve at some point can wait half an hour. They don't even need to be thought about. if the head is still functioning, the sort of silence seems like pointless, like, come on, let's get on with it. Like, nothing to be gained here. But if it quietens down and we find that that space is self-contenting, today's online post was, keep returning to the you that is unaffected, that remains untouched by circumstance. Rest here until you know yourself so well, until you know that this consciousness, this peaceful consciousness, is who you are at your core, and you never forget it. So what that means is when we find ourselves in a situation in life where the car has a flat battery, keep returning to the you that is unaffected and remains untouched by circumstance. And rest there until you know yourself so well that you never forget that this peaceful consciousness is the very core of who you are. So even in the face of receiving news of your imminent death, at some point, many people receive news from a doctor after certain tests that is not great news as far as the body's existence goes. And even in the face of that news, there is a part of us that is untouched and remains unaffected by circumstance. So if we have no contact with this place, this news is devastating. Because the only knowledge we have of ourselves is the knowledge of the physical, knowledge of our relationship to life on a physical level and maybe an emotional level. And so the news of death is a complete attack on who I am on a physical and emotional level. And my emotions, my love, my relationship with others is going to be cut off. And my physical existence is going to be cut off. So there's a great fear around that, like I am being annihilated. Me and everything that makes me who I am. The relationships I have, my role in life. But if we know this other place, which is not on the level of manifestation, not part of the flow of life, then I know that when things come and go, I'm still here. So if part of that news from the doctor is that you're going to have to lose part of your body and say, I'm sorry, but I have to amputate your leg. This core of who we are isn't amputated with the leg. So we don't lose a little bit of who we are when the operation happens. So we don't then need to feel completely redefined by this new occurrence. I'm not suggesting that there isn't going to be some adjusting on certain levels, of course. But amidst that adjusting, we can always come back and find, oh, here I am. So I'd like to talk a little bit about doing, not as in a doer doing, just life happening. Life happening in a way where life is lived based on what we feel like doing, rather than what the long lists of shoulds and shouldn'ts in our head tell us life should look like. So when we live through the list of shoulds and shouldn'ts, what we're actually believing is the deeply ingrained belief that says, my happiness is to be found in outcomes, and the shoulds and shouldn'ts are there in order for us to get the best outcomes. They're a strategy that says, if I do this, that's the best way of getting the outcome I want. I should do this, I shouldn't do that. So it's important to remember that the belief in personal doership and the belief that my happiness is to be found in outcomes is an error. It's based on the wrong idea of ourselves. It's based on a disconnection from our true nature. And part of this belief manifests in a long list of how I should live my life. That's been put in place by our parents, by society, that have told us these are the important things in life. They're all outcomes when we look at them. And society says this is most important. You know, don't put anything else ahead of this. And so some parents will tell us what is most important is financial stability, or working hard, being a contributor to society, or being kind to others, or saving the world, being environmentally conscious. Now, I'm not saying that some of those things are not very worthwhile values, but if we prioritize them, if we say this is the most important thing, then we're saying that what is really most important are outcomes. And remember, we need to flip this around and say, no, what am I really looking for? I'm looking for happiness. I've assumed in the past that my happiness will come when there is a global awakening, or when global warming is no longer a threat, or when I have financial stability. And we know from our own experience that some of the objectives that we set get met. We might find ourselves financially stable, and it's true that makes life easier. It makes life more pleasurable. But we're very clear from our own experience that doesn't suddenly solve uncomfortableness on a deeper level. And it's very evident. We just need to listen to the stories of people in life that have more money than they could ever wish to spend. And some of them come out openly and say, let me tell you, I'm one of the most unhappy and miserable people in life. We have an idea that, yeah, but that's them. If I had the money, then it would be okay. And I know that's how it feels. And time again, we get the goal that we're looking for, thinking this is it. Once this happens, everything's going to be okay. So imagine a job promotion. We've got our fingers crossed. We're going, this would be so great. If I get this, I don't have to work 10-hour days anymore. I end up in a nice, comfortable position financially, and work becomes easier. I just want this job promotion. And we get the job promotion. It's true, things become more pleasurable in some levels, but there's a whole new series of uncomfortablenesses with the new situation. And a continuation of uncomfortablenesses with the people that you meet on the street that look at you in the wrong way, or people at the shops that bump into you, or people that are meant to pick you up at 10 o'clock and it's 10:30 and they still haven't arrived. Issues with the politicians' view that they're putting forward on the evening news, and with your kids for, not having performed a certain way in school or cleaned up their bedroom, and so what we find is, yes, I have financial circumstance, but my attitude is exactly the same as it was, an attitude that is still looking for completeness in circumstance, and life is never going to be pleasure, 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 pleasure. So we really need to assess where this happiness comes from, and keep coming back to where it really stems from, which is not changing circumstance, but dropping into a place of connection. So when we see that this list of shoulds and shouldn'ts is all based on a strategy to get the perfect circumstance, a strategy that our parents or society have told us this is what happiness looks like, this is the path to happiness, when we realize, why I've got this list that is forcing me to move outward. And my experience is that if we keep moving in that direction, an uncomfortableness builds up. And once I saw this is just a belief system, I don't have to do anything. There's a huge range of options available in each moment, that because I have this list of shoulds and shouldn'ts and a fear about what other people might think if I do something differently, these large range of options get sort of discarded. But once attention lands on this and says, why am I doing this? Is it really delivering what I'm looking for? And we find, no, it's not. It's creating a frustration with life. And then I don't have to do it this way. So what it requires is for us to put a certain priority in place. And for me, the priority in practical terms, because a lot of what we've been talking about was the theory, a theory that is very much based on practice. And so at some point in my journey, it was, I have to start doing what I feel like, not what I am being told to do by my head. And so that required a priority to be put in place, and that priority was the end of internal conflict. So it became very clear to me what I'm looking for is the end of internal conflict, which is peace of mind. I'm not looking for outcomes. I thought I was looking for outcomes. I'm looking for the end of internal conflict. So once I became really clear on that, that was put up on the pedestal. I became completely convinced what I'm looking for is the end of internal conflict, which really means what I'm really looking for is peace of mind. And I've been conditioned in a way that tells me otherwise up to this point in time. I've been conditioned by life to think that what needs to be on the pedestal is outcomes. So when I realized this is not right, it was really great to take that outcomes off the pedestal and put that there. I didn't take outcomes off and throw it away as though it's irrelevant. Outcomes are still part of the flow of life, they're pleasure and pain. But they came off the priority pedestal and went on to a lower level. And what went onto the priority pedestal is the end of internal conflict. And I realized that my internal conflict was something as simple as this. My journey was very fortunate in that I didn't have intense suffering in my life, no depression or anxiety or shame or strong blame towards and hatred towards the other. So very lucky in that regard. But having said that, the principle applies regardless. Everything we're talking about here doesn't apply to someone who's just got a very light load of suffering. The principle is the same whether you have a heavy load of suffering or a light load of suffering. But in my case, my internal conflict was something as simple as this. I get home from work and I was tired. And I loved my couch. Like it was a long enough couch, like a 3-seater couch, not a 2-seater, that I could lie on it, completely laid out flat. And so the first thing, as soon as I opened the door, I put my bag down and just lie on the couch. And it was great. To me, when you're hungry, there's nothing better than eating. And when you're tired, there's nothing better than resting. And when you feel like being energetic, there's nothing better than exercise. If you have to do exercise when you're tired, it's not so great. If you have to eat when you're not hungry, it's not so great. So coming in line with doing what the body is asking for is fantastic on many levels. One, it allows us to start feeling. What I feel like means we have to become present with the body. And two, it delivers pleasure in that we start doing and fulfilling what we feel like. And so the conflict was here. I'd lie on the couch and then I'd look at my watch and it was like 5 to 7 and I had an appointment at 7:30. Which means I have 5 minutes more of lying on the couch before I have to go and have a shower and get ready to go out. And I'd think, 5 minutes. I need 5 hours, not 5 minutes. And so then 7 o'clock would come and I'd push it past, maybe another 5 minutes. If I'm 5 minutes late, well, it's okay, or I can run, get there on time. So another 5 minutes passed, and as I can feel this internal conflict, like, no, I don't want to get up. Anyway, so I'd get up. And at some point, it's like, no, I don't have to get up. I have options. Only if we question the shoulds and shouldn'ts that we have. So I shouldn't say, I shouldn't cancel an appointment. That's going to make my friend angry or the client angry. They're going to think I'm unreliable. Well, you would be unreliable. And that would be terrible. What if they think I'm unreliable? What are the consequences of that going to be? I'll lose them as a client. They won't be my friend. terrible, this cannot happen. All of that is outcomes, pleasure or pain. And we are convinced that we are defined by outcomes, defined by what the other person thinks of us. And so, the thought arose one day, you can cancel. You can cancel, it's an option. And with this end of internal conflict being on the top of my priority, at some point it made so much sense to cancel. Because if I didn't cancel, the internal conflict being a difference between what I felt like doing and what I was actually saying to myself, you need to do. If I didn't cancel, the internal conflict was being maintained. Previously, when what was on the pedestal was outcomes, it made sense to push through that. Come on, you can do it. But once the outcomes came off the pedestal and end of internal conflict was on the pedestal, then it didn't make any sense. So, hi, look, I'm really sorry, but I need to cancel our meeting tonight. In my mind, I thought this is going to be terrible. They're going to be upset with me. And instead, what I found is they said, oh, that's great, I'm feeling tired too. Let's do it another night. Great. Okay, thanks. Then, at some point, it became clear that I had to stop making plans of the sort of things that I continually found were creating this internal conflict. So I even found that playing golf, which I used to do on a Saturday morning with a group of friends, which I used to say yes to every time. The invitation comes, and I'd say, yes, that sounds great, I'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock, or even 6 o'clock. What a crazy thing to say yes to. I get up at 6 o'clock if I have to catch an aeroplane now, if I can't find one that doesn't leave later. But to get up at 6 o'clock on Saturday, given how my biology was feeling at that point in time, what was I thinking? And so I'd do it, get there, and half asleep. Then the sun would come out, we're playing golf, it's hot. I don't know if anyone's played golf, it's a frustrating game. And after 5 hours, I was just looking forward to going home. And at some point I realized, I don't enjoy doing this. Why do I do it? I just say yes because I think this is something I should do. In theory, when you put it together, sport or hobby, friends, Saturday morning, sort of all sounds like a good package when we just think about it. But if you go to your feeling, for me particularly, so someone else will go to the feeling of those things and it will be fantastic. I really enjoy this. This is one of the highlights of my week. For me, it was like, no, this is not the way. So end of making those plans, end of making plans to go out after work, because what I like is to lie on the couch. So there came a point where no more plans. I had to be spontaneous in what I was doing, because if I planned what I was going to be doing in a week's time, I'd feel, what do I feel like doing? And often it wasn't what I had planned. So the end of making plans started to happen, because I had to be authentic and honor this feeling. What do I feel like doing in each moment? And so when friends said, well, do you want to go out to the movies or to a concert, and we need to buy tickets today, do you want to go? And I said, well, I don't know. I can't say yes because I don't know what I'm going to feel like doing. And then I realized, but if I don't say yes and the tickets sell out, if I feel like going 10 minutes before the concert starts, I might not be able to go. And I thought, that's fine, that's just an outcome, pleasure or pain, and it's not my priority. So as long as I can accept that the outcome at that point in time may not be what is my preferred option, at least I'm honoring living from a place of doing what I feel like, knowing that the outcome is not in my control. And so this was a completely new way of functioning, a way that required me to become present with what I feel like doing. Means awareness needs to land on the instruction being given by the body. Now, it sounds like this is a very chaotic way of living life, and the good news is that once a shift from thinking to feeling happens, I found that a balancing act happened, whereby at some point I started feeling like I could say yes to things a week or even a month or a year in advance. I started feeling when someone asked me, and I feel, instead of feeling, well, I don't know how I'm going to feel, I'd feel a yes or a no. Now, this isn't the yes or a no from the old way of what we might call feeling, because in the old way, it's like, oh, that sounds good, yes. That's not really feeling a yes or a no. Feeling a yes or a no is becoming really familiar with when the body is talking to you. Anyway, the point of all of this is that when I observed a shift from doing what I think I should do to what I feel like doing, life changed radically. A huge amount of freedom came into my experience of life. In both cases, I felt like I was doing exactly what I was destined to do. When I was living from the list of shoulds and shouldn'ts, I saw that the shoulds and shouldn'ts were not put in place by me, but put in place by life. And so it was life that was forcing me to live through the shoulds and shouldn'ts. At some point, life brought awareness to the fact that my priority is not really outcomes, but peace. And it was life that brought about a reconditioning. And it was life that brought about a different feeling of being in flow, which wasn't there previously. In both cases, it's God's instruction to all of us as to what to do next, either what we feel like doing or what we think we should do. Both coming from not me. Both a result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning. What I have found is that when we follow the instruction from God that is in the body, it's an instruction that keeps us in line with an easy flow. Now, remember, when I say flow here, it's different to the flow of life. The flow of life includes whatever is happening. So the flow of life, if we do what we think we should do, and it's uncomfortable, that's still what I would call the flow of life. It's life unfolding moment after moment, exactly as it's destined to unfold. The flow I'm talking about is a flow where actually just feels like we're living life with no resistance. Actually, like we're being lived. So that's why I say Roger Castillo, being lived, because there's nothing truer that describes the fact that in each moment I feel like instruction comes from outside. And then the outside is felt in the body, and the movement happens based on this impulse that arises in the body. And I didn't create the impulse. I don't create the feeling of hunger. I don't create the feeling of tiredness. I'm moved by the feeling of hunger. I'm moved by the feeling of tiredness. If the doorbell rings, I don't create the ringing of the doorbell, and I don't create the response that happens in the body. The body is programmed to know that the sound of a doorbell means there's someone on the other side of the door. And so the body responds to the sound of the doorbell, and there's a movement. And so to the extent that I become aware of the fact this is how I'm being moved in life, by impulses arising in the body that are driving the body in a certain direction. And so the feeling is not only a biologic, it's not just the feeling of hunger and tiredness. that drives us. There's a great intelligence in the body. So even thought plays a role in the final feeling of what to do in a moment. So remember, there's the thinking mind and the working mind. The thinking mind is the part of the mind that says, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. There's no other option, because that part of the mind is convinced that our happiness is to be found in outcomes. The working mind, on the other hand, is the functional part of the mind that looks at a situation and decides whether it's safe, decides what needs to be done in a certain situation in order to have the best chance of getting what you would like. But that part of the mind is not attached to outcomes, doesn't believe that they need to happen. It's the functional working of the mind. And so when making a decision, and life requires us to make decisions time and time again. When making a decision, my decision is based on what I feel like doing. But that feeling, the final feeling, is contributed to by several faculties of the body. One, the biological feelings of, let's say, tiredness or hunger. Other is financial capabilities, let's say, which are part of the working mind. There's an understanding of the financial capabilities. Then the working mind also works out what is more convenient and what the possible outcomes are going to be. And it just delivers that data into the system. So if I'm looking for a flight ticket, and there's 3 tickets, a really expensive one in the middle, and a really cheap one. The one in the middle is the same amount of time as the really expensive one. And the really cheap one is 3 times as long a travel. So the working mind looks at them and assesses the situation and then delivers that information to the system. So we have the biological feelings, we have information delivered by the working mind, and our intuition. And probably some other faculties that I haven't mentioned. And to the extent that the thinking mind isn't directing the show, then these intelligences of the body get to all work together, and what ends up is a final feeling of what decision to make. Not directed by the thinking mind. A final decision, and I don't know what that final decision is. What I do know is, as long as I live consistently from a place of doing what I feel like, even if the outcome is not always the best, and doing what we feel like is not a magic formula to getting pleasure, 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 pleasure. What it does do is it means that I'm always connected to source, understanding that these feelings are source functioning through the body, recognizing that I don't create these feelings, I don't create the functioning of the working mind, and I don't create the function of intuition. So I watch a decision being made. And in moments when someone says, this is what you have to decide, I'm asking you if you want to come on holiday or not. And we go for a decision, and there's no decision. Nothing's clear. So for me, in that moment, the decision is no decision. The thinking mind will be saying, I have to make a decision. Why can't I make a decision? It's up to me to make a decision. If that part of our thinking has fallen away, we wait for an instruction. And if an instruction isn't there, we understand that instruction doesn't have to be there. It's destined for a decision not to be made at this point in time. And we wait till a feeling comes. And if someone's putting pressure on us, saying, look, you need to tell me what, at some point you say, look, make it clear so that it's easy for you. Say, I can't give you a decision. Is it okay for you to give me some more time? Hopefully I'll be able to give you a decision by then. I understand that you may need to make your own plans. So if you can't give me more time, or if waiting longer interferes with your own plans, go ahead and carry on as if I'm not being involved. And when I say that, I understand that I might miss out. Their plans might change. And so I might then get a feeling that says, yes, I want to go on holiday. And I contact them and they go, oh, I spoke to another friend and now I'm going on holiday with them. And that is maybe pain in the moment, but there's no regret. It's like, oh, I completely understand that that was a possibility. And for me, I was honoring the living from this place, of doing in each moment what I feel like. And as long as we're not attached to outcomes, as long as the outcome is clearly seen to be pleasure and pain, then the fact that outcomes don't always turn out the way we want is not a problem. So in morning meditation, if you feel like lying in bed, you don't feel like getting up to be here at 8 o'clock, my suggestion is, in each moment, do what you feel like doing. And in order to do what we feel like doing, we need to be very present. And if we keep that awareness functioning as often as we can, then we can remain present with the outcomes of what happens when we start doing what we feel like doing. And we'll start to realize that there are maybe some feelings that are coming in that are not coming from this place of absence of the thinking mind. So we can sometimes feel something and it's heavily dictated by attachment to outcome. And still, I suggest follow that with awareness, which means you do it knowing this is what I feel like doing. And generally speaking, if you do things from a place of attachment to outcome, we're always disappointed with what happens. Not just the outcome, but how it leaves us feeling. And so to the extent that our awareness is aware of what we feel like doing, and also it has to then remain present afterwards, we'll start realizing, hey, when I move from this feeling, it's not as authentic as I thought. And so then that feeling will start to not be considered what I feel like doing. It will start to be considered, oh, that's still what I think I should do, based on what I think is important. And so some feelings are sort of like an addiction to outcome, but so deeply ingrained that they sort of feel like, this is what I feel like doing. And it takes experience, it takes practice to start to see the difference between the different feelings and what the root at the different feelings is. So even if someone is completely addicted to cigarettes, let's say, and they say, what should I do? I'm completely addicted to that. I say, do what you feel like doing in each moment. And they, but smoking's not good for me. I say, drop that idea. Right? Just for a bit. I mean, you've been smoking for 10 years or 20 years. Drop it for the next month. That smoking is not good for you. That you shouldn't smoke. And just do what you feel like. Which really means you have to become present, that when you have a cigarette, you're having a cigarette because I feel like it. Don't judge yourself for it. That's the thinking mind telling me what I should and shouldn't do, where my happiness is, and just enjoy the cigarette. And I'm quite confident that if we approach life, including those habits, with a freedom, dropping all of the shoulds and shouldn'ts, that the guilt will fall away, because the guilt is there because we have these strong ideas about what we should and shouldn't do. The guilt will fall away, and in the space, we might actually realize, I don't really want to smoke, smoking was coming from probably the same pattern of guilt that has now fallen away. And to the extent we smoke and feel guilty about it, the guilt is being kept in place because its outer manifestation, the outer manifestation of guilt, is being treated as real. And so the lower level of guilt, the deeper ingrained guilt, is not able to be seen. So if you were to smoke without feeling guilty, realizing that guilt is just an idea of what we should or shouldn't do, and it includes this strong idea that I am the doer, that I'm the one that is in control of these feelings of to smoke or not smoke. We just surrender to the fact that in this moment I'm driven to have a cigarette. Have it, no guilt, and my suggestion is the underlying suffering will become eminently more seen, able to be seen much more clearly. And if we see the underlying suffering, then the whole dynamic changes. And the need or the feeling to smoke is quite possibly going to fall away. To the extent we keep feeling guilty about not smoking or smoking, the dynamic doesn't change and the habit remains in place. I'd also suggest that at some point we realize that when I'm doing what I feel like, at first it is going to come from these suppressed energies of uncomfortableness, and that might include ignoring the others, because we might realize that for such a long time we've been completely doing what the other wants us to do. And so at some point we start doing, no, that's it, I'm just going to do what I feel like. So I put a tick next to that. I say, yes, it's worthwhile doing that. At some point we realize this is causing problems for people around me. And an awareness of that will start to possibly change how we do things. It will change the feeling of what we feel like doing, whereby we don't revert back to doing exactly what the other wants us to do, but we see that living a particular way doesn't take the other into consideration. And when we don't take the other into consideration and they get hurt, that actually hurts me. And so then there's a refining that says, I'm not going to go back and just do what the other wants, because that really hurts me on a level of inner conflict. But I'm going to adjust the way I'm doing it now, where I'm going to take the other into consideration, which means I'm going to include in my mix of information what the other would like. Not meaning that I'm going to do it, but I'm going to consider it. And then the final feeling includes a consideration for the other, without necessarily delivering the outcome that they want, but at least you've considered the other in your decision. There must be some comments on the idea of living based on doing in each moment what you feel like, rather than doing in each moment what you think you should or shouldn't do.
So does this also apply to feelings? Like, for example, anger? I mean, if you feel like being angry with someone and it just comes out like that, is it, you must consider how he feels and what this anger may cause him, like suffering or something else?
Not so much with, we don't control how any of this ends up being. So even the discussion we just had, which talks about considering the other, that's not something that the individual does as a doer. That is something that you might find happens in the moment based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning. So in my case, it was an awareness of my experience that realized, there's a better way in implementing my doing what I feel like, because I'm not taking the other into consideration. And actually I want harmony in daily life, which really means daily life is interhuman relationship. So I want harmony in interhuman relationship. That doesn't mean harmony on the level of pleasure and pain necessarily, but where I don't hate myself or hate the other. So really that harmony comes where I see I am not the doer and the other is not the doer. And so as part of my experience, I saw I can't help myself not taking the other into consideration up to that point in time. But once I started realizing there's a better way, then that became part of my new conditioning. So the realization, I could communicate my intentions in a more efficient way or a more polite way. Once I realized that realization was new conditioning, which then meant from that point on, I found myself acting differently. So taking the other into consideration is not an instruction. It's just a description based on my experience that this is part of the refining of this process, and it might become part of your up-to-date conditioning, and then you'll observe when you do what you feel like and it doesn't take the other into consideration, which is not your doing, not something you're doing wrong, it's a happening, but then you observe it and you think, can it happen differently? Can I function differently? And that can I function differently is still not your doing, it's just a result of your up-to-date conditioning. Right? So when it comes to anger, anger is part of your genes and up-to-date conditioning and the circumstance you find yourself in. We don't control anger, it just happens. So I'm not at all suggesting that we bring a doer in that says, I have to do what the other wants. I have to consider the other. See, it's not another should or shouldn't. It's just a description of my experience for you to consider, and in you considering it, it becomes part of your experience. And so that's why I say these are never prescriptions of something to do, but just descriptions of what might happen. And so you might find yourself starting to do what you feel like. And if you find yourself doing what you feel like, you'll realize, I'm now doing what I feel like more than I did before, because my genes and up-to-date conditioning has changed. So when it comes to anger, if you find yourself just getting angry and completely hurting the other person, that anger is a biological reaction based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning, and it couldn't have happened any other way. If you see for yourself that getting angry is not solving the situation, then your seeing of that will become part of your up-to-date conditioning. And you might find yourself counting to 10 as the feeling of anger arises. And that counting to 10, instead of expressing the anger, is not your doing, but a happening according to your genes and up-to-date conditioning, which seems to be, I realized that anger isn't solving the situation, and therefore I am the one that is stopping and counting to 10. But actually we can look at it as that anger happened, the reaction in your friends happened, you realize that, let's say anger, you're on the phone to a call center and they put you on hold for the 10th time. And when they come back, you just get angry, look, and shout at them. And they hang up. And you realize this anger is not helping me get what I want. And so at some point I thought to myself, if I want some person on the other end of the phone who is just an employee of a company to help me because the company's systems aren't working, my best chance of getting assistance is if I'm nice to the person. Whereas previously, anger would arise. Now, anger arose previously because of my genes and up-to-date conditioning. With this thought, this realization, actually, if I'm nice to them, they're more likely to help me. That appears to be my thought. I thought, but actually, the thought arose based on the circumstance that was in front of me that I wasn't in control of. So the thought was not my doing, but a happening. It was life reconditioning me. And then in subsequent calls, I might find frustration about to happen, and then the thought arises, just be nice. Why am I saying just be nice? Because I realize I'm more likely to get what I need by being nice. And anger maybe doesn't arise, or anger still arises. Right? We don't know how the genes and up-to-date conditioning are exactly. We only know what happens, and what happens we know as a result of the genes and up-to-date conditioning. So even with the realization, on a particular day, you might find yourself getting really angry. So be it. You might find that they hang up on you. So be it. So if we have certain realizations, then they might affect the outcome. But the more important aspect is to see that whatever happens is a result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning in that moment. The reason for that is that blame towards the other and blame towards oneself is when we see anger arising, we see the other being hurt, let's say, and then we blame ourselves for getting angry. Now, the anger is the biological reaction, pain in the moment. The blaming ourselves for getting angry is the psychological, it's our attitude to what happened in the moment. And that's the suffering. I shouldn't have got angry. I'm, a terrible human being. That's our attitude to what happened in the flow of life. It's attitudinal, not circumstantial. And that's our unhappiness. Our happiness is the ending of unhappiness. So is it possible for you to get angry and see it as a happening, not your doing? Is it possible for the other to get angry at you and for you to see it as a happening and not their doing? A happening that delivers pain to you in the moment, because clearly it would be much nicer if they joked around with you instead of were angry at you. So if they were pleasant, that's pleasurable. If they're angry, it's painful. That's part of the flow of life. Our happiness is never to be found in pleasure or pain. So my happiness is never to be found by insisting that they are pleasant, 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 pleasant. So the fact that they have got angry and delivered pain to me, with a certain understanding, is going to be received as pain, but the resistance to it, resisting it as if it is my unhappiness, doesn't happen. On the basis it doesn't happen is, one, realizing that their anger is pain and my happiness isn't to be found in pain, and two, seeing that the anger is a happening based on their genes and up-to-date conditioning that they weren't in control of, and so blaming them doesn't make sense. Blaming them is based on the idea that they could have and should have acted differently. So this deep seeing that whatever happens through us in each moment is a happening and not my doing is essential. The deep seeing that even the insight that comes that says, if I get angry, that's pain in the moment for the other person, and they're less likely to deliver pleasure in the moment to me if I deliver pain to them. That recognition is a thought arising, right? Not my doing. And that thought then changes my up-to-date conditioning. And what happens after that is going to be based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning. It doesn't mean that anger won't arise. It depends on my genes and up-to-date conditioning and the circumstance I find myself in. So at the point when it's clear that I'm going to die, in practical terms, one of the thoughts that I suspect will arise, because not only is a thought, but it's my experience in each moment, is that it's okay, I can die, because I've lived my whole life doing exactly what I feel like doing. Now, on the surface that sounds very selfish, but what I find is that as the belief in personal doership fell away, what I felt like doing didn't include just pleasure for Roger. It included pleasure for Roger and at the same time, hopefully, pleasure for those around me. So the feeling that we have when the sense of personal doership falls away is not a feeling where we need to have more and more and more just for me. That's actually the feeling that comes from the belief in personal doership that thinks that happiness is to be found in outcomes. And so when that's in place, we tend to be selfish. When it falls away, doing what you feel like doing tends to be harmonious with those around you.
So if you get angry and it's okay with you, and you don't care about how the other feels.
Say it again.
If you just get angry and you're okay with that, and you understand that it's just a happening and you couldn't help it, and at the same time you don't mind how the other feels, because you think that he had it coming.
Well, so I wouldn't say I don't care or I don't mind. right? That takes it too far. What happens if I get angry, there's a clear understanding that it's my destiny for whatever the person did to be there. That they weren't the one that was in control of what happened in that moment. And it's clear that the circumstance, the pain, let's say, that the other delivered was my destiny and their destiny to deliver it. And it was my destiny to get angry and their destiny to receive the anger. And then it's my destiny to receive whatever comes next. So, seeing that whatever happens through me is a result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning or destiny unfolding means that I accept it. I accept that it was their destiny for me to get angry at them. I don't see it as pleasant. I see that what they did is pain towards me. I see that me getting angry is pain for myself and pain for them. I would much rather that I don't deliver pain to the other, so directly after getting angry, I can apologize. I'm sorry for getting angry, but the apology is not one filled with guilt and regret, because an apology filled with guilt and regret believes I could have done it differently. So I'm sorry for getting angry doesn't mean I should have done it differently. I'm saying I'm sorry that the anger that happened through me, I don't really say this, just I'm sorry for getting angry. But what I mean is I'm sorry that the anger has delivered you pain. It was not my intention to hurt you. So I'm apologizing, and the apology is a happening as well. So it's not a disregard for the other, it's just a clear understanding of what is happening, including seeing the pain as pain. The anger is pain in the moment. So anger and blame are different. Anger is a biological reaction and it's pain in the moment. Blame is a psychological reaction which treats the other as the doer. Now, because blame often arises with pain or in relation to painful situations, when we get angry simultaneously, there is this big load of blame with it. And so when I was visiting Ramesh, one of the last things that I saw, and it took me a long time to get this, was Ramesh kept saying, anger is a biological reaction, sadness is a biological reaction, it is not suffering. And I was very familiar with what suffering felt like. And I'd say to Ramesh, I'm sorry, but from my own experience, anger is suffering. Anger is an uncomfortableness with the other person and an uncomfortableness ultimately with myself. And Ramesh would repeat, Roger, pain is a biological reaction and not suffering. So suffering in this teaching is termed as a psychological reaction. Biological reaction is not suffering. I couldn't understand how to classify anger as a biological reaction and not psychological reaction, because each time anger arose, I would feel it and I would feel the uncomfortableness. And so Ramesh kept telling me, Roger, anger is a biological reaction, not psychological reaction. And so at some point I said to myself, well, he's wrong. I feel when I feel angry, and there's an uncomfortableness there, not just a biological feeling. So my expectation was that one day anger would stop happening. And while I was in the shop one time, a situation happened, and I got angry. And then afterwards I was thinking about it because I was feeling, and I was going, you see, there's this uncomfortable feeling. So anger is not a biological reaction, it's psychological. And then at some point, I realized when I was thinking is that, what if Ramesh is right? What if anger is a biological reaction? And in my belief system, I'm categorizing it as suffering. And then I looked at the fact that this mission, this self-understanding, was so important to me. And I was looking for the end of suffering. And I realized, wow, if I've got this wrong, if anger is a biological reaction and I'm treating it as suffering, then every time anger comes up, I'm going to judge it as inappropriate, judge it as meaning enlightenment hasn't happened because I'm still getting angry, blame the other for making me angry, blame myself for getting angry. And in that moment, it occurred to me that what I'm feeling may not be the biological anger, but the load of guilt and blame and expectation that is arising simultaneous to the biological anger. And so intellectually, I realized, I thought, wow, this could be what's happening. And then 2 weeks later, I was taking the dogs out for a walk in the forest adjoining my property, and I had to put them over a fence. And I had the 2 dogs over on the other side of the fence, and I was holding onto their leashes, and then I have to step over the fence, and the fence has a line of barbed wire at the top of it. So it's a bit precarious. With one leg over the fence, the barbed wire in between my legs, I noticed that a kangaroo started jumping past, and the dogs saw it. And I could see the dogs about to chase after the kangaroo. And the barbed wire in between, and I'm holding. So I could have let go of the leash, I guess, and then the dogs and the kangaroo would have, who knows what. And what arose was this response, which was to shout at the dogs and break their attention on the kangaroo and get them to look at me. So the response was of anger towards the dogs for getting ready to run after the kangaroos. And the anger towards the dogs, the shouting, did its job. And in that moment was the first time that anger arose without suffering around it. Because 2 weeks earlier, the concept that anger is a biological reaction and not a psychological reaction entered into my system in a way that I considered it. Yes, maybe it's true. I saw that because I was thinking that enlightenment would bring the end of anger, whenever anger arose, I would judge it automatically. I didn't realize I was doing it, but that's what was happening. And so this was the first time that I experienced anger without blame. And without blame to myself, which is guilt, really. And that's when I laughed, and I went, once again, because Ramesh was always right, there were about 6 major points that I just couldn't get for a while, and each time they clicked, and he was right. And so we have to be clear that sadness and anger are biological reactions, which means they happen vertically in the moment. And then the suffering is always horizontal, that carries on after the situation, where the thinking is, they shouldn't have done this to me, I shouldn't have acted that way, why is this happening to me? That's all the horizontal suffering. The biological anger is vertical. It just arises and falls. And to the extent we understand that anger, being biological, not psychological, means that anger is not going to stop after liberation. We have plenty of examples of sages in life that get angry. And so there's a hint. The when I say plenty of examples, people like to portray the sages in life as being never angry, because the disciples around that take the photos of the sages and write the books still have the idea that anger and pleasure, 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 pleasure is their happiness. And so projected onto the sage is the idea that he won't get angry. He won't deliver pain to people in life, because there is an attachment still from the people around for pleasure, 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 pleasure. And so it can be hard for them to portray the sage in moments of anger. So those bits get left out. Luckily, even in the teachings that are written down in relation to Ramana, there are sections in there, in talks, where he gets angry with his attendant who is insisting that he has his medicine. And he doesn't like taking the medicine. And he gets annoyed and angry with the attendant. And there's a couple of other situations where he gets angry. But for the sage, the anger is witnessed as a happening arising in a body-mind organism. Right? Not my doing, but a happening. And we have the example of Jesus, who goes into the temple and starts turning over all of the merchants' tables because they are disrespecting the temple space and treating it like a marketplace, or turning it into a marketplace. And so he found himself in a situation, anger arose, it was expressed, and the recognition, assuming the understanding is there, is that the anger and the biological movements of turning over the table will be seen as a happening arising in a particular body-mind. And the same with the setting up of the shops in the marketplace was seen to be a happening according to the body-mind organisms, the merchants. And once the anger has subsided, there'll be no hatred towards the people that did that, and no hatred towards himself for having got angry. So it's over. Anger arose the next minute. In theory, someone could come and invite him out for a drink. Let's go and have a drink. Or he could invite them out for a drink. I'm sorry, I overreacted. Let's go and have a drink. So there's no hatred towards the other for what has happened. This is actually the core of the understanding, is when the other delivers pain to me, it's now seen to be a happening, my destiny, for pain to be delivered and destiny of the other to do the delivering of the pain. With the understanding that pain, when it arises in the moment, is destined, and that my happiness, my completeness, is not affected by pleasure or pain. Fundamentally not affected. It's affected if there is a belief in place, but if that belief isn't there, the understanding is my happiness isn't affected by pleasure or pain. So with this perspective, what happens is impersonal. It's just destiny unfolding. So hating the other, who is really just the messenger delivering my destiny, doesn't make sense. Whereas if life is seen personally, I'm the doer and the other is the doer. When my destiny is delivered, it's not seen as destiny, it's seen as you hurt me, I hate you. Completely personal. Or I hurt you, I hate myself. So in the same way, If I get angry, that anger is pain for me and it's pain for the other person. And I see it's my destiny for there to be pain in the moment, their destiny for there to be pain in the moment. And so I don't hate myself for getting angry. Doesn't mean I don't apologize. Doesn't mean I see anger as irrelevant. I see anger as pain.
Roger, you said in every moment we should do what we feel to do, and not follow shoulds and shouldn't.
Let me just be clear. Not you should.
Right. You do what you feel to do.
Yeah, but I'm not telling you should do it.
Yeah,
right?
okay. That's true.
Important.
When you say what you feel to do, is it what you like to do, or it's understandable in private life? If you want to go to a dinner with a friend you like or you don't like, but if I see some let's say ordinary business commitments, and I wake up on Monday morning and I have 15 things to do, and how to make this distinction, what I feel to do and what I should or shouldn't.
Yeah. So it's a little complex to explain, and we sort of learn from experience. We see it from experience. At the point where it started happening in my life, I was becoming very clear on this uncomfortableness. So my radar was very much tuned to feeling this uncomfortableness. And in a way, I knew that this uncomfortableness was not my true nature. I knew that this search was a search to know myself. That's what the teachings that came to me early on said, that there is this mistake that has happened in life that has made us forget ourselves. And seeking is a journey of rediscovery. Seeking is a movement back to knowing ourselves. It's the purpose of life, to know oneself. It's the only important thing, really, is to come to know oneself. And when I read this, everything said, yes, this is what I need to dedicate my life to. And the process unfolded, and at some point in the process, it became clear that suffering, even in its mild forms, is a sign of not knowing oneself. To whatever degree is still there, the not knowing is still there. And so maintaining the circumstance or the attitude that is bringing about the suffering was unacceptable to me. Right? Because this mission, this coming to know myself, was the only thing that really made sense. So I didn't want, nothing was going to get in its way. So I found myself starting with small things first, doing what I feel like doing in the areas that felt appropriate, where I felt like I can change this, I can choose a different option that previously I didn't think was available. Because the outcomes as a result of choosing a different option in certain areas were acceptable to me, even if they were bad outcomes. I said, okay, so I started there. As I started there, an understanding of how starting to do what I feel like instead of what I should and shouldn't, I start to see this is really changing beliefs and really undoing the false idea of who I am. At some point, what was left was the feeling of not feeling like going to work was in line with was taking me offline. So there was an uncomfortable feeling with going to work. I wasn't able to address it early on. It was too big a circumstance in my life. The consequences seemed too significant. But at a certain point, once I had addressed everything else on top of that, the smaller ones first, it came to a point where I was ready to look at that. And so I found that there is a feeling that says, no, you don't feel like going into work. Now, just to be clear, because this gets recorded and it's on there, I'm not suggesting that this is what everyone will need to do. This just happened to be my process. My circumstance was different to a lot of people's, and I didn't have a family, I didn't have children. And so addressing it the way I addressed it made sense, and it delivered fantastic change. Even if someone has a family and commitments, I'm not saying that that makes it inappropriate to do what I did. These descriptions, these discussions are not telling anyone to do anything a particular way. It's saying we have to start feeling and observing how we make decisions, see if it delivers what it delivers, and see whether that makes sense in relation to what we are really looking for. And so the answers come not from me, but from you ultimately as to what to do. The guidance can come from me. So at some point it was like, I don't feel like going into work, and it's creating an internal disharmony going into work. So you've heard the story, I'm sure, that for about a month I looked at my options, and it was clear if I stop going into work, I lose my job. If I lose my job, I'll have no income. If I have no income, I can't pay my rent, and I can't sustain a lot of the other activities that I had in my life. But my priority was the end of internal conflict. I looked at all of these things, rent, activities in my life, and they were pleasure or pain, outcomes. At some point I said, outcome is not my priority. My priority is internal comfort. And I looked at situations that were available to me. And what seemed available was I go and live in the forest in a caravan, like a small thing that you hook onto the back of your car. And when I thought about this, the more and more I thought about it, the more and more great this solution seemed. Because I loved nature, I loved camping, I hated having all of these financial commitments and having to work hard to pay all of these bills. And as I looked at this scenario, it meant my life would look like me waking up in the morning as if I'm camping with nothing particular to do during the day. There was a basic social security system in Australia, and I said, okay, I'm even going to drop the idea that I shouldn't, take money from the system. Actually, I said, well, the system is there, and if I don't have a job, I'm entitled to that money as part of the system. So I could see that I'd have enough money for food and more than enough money for what I needed if I had a caravan living in the forest. And so for a month, I really imagined what it would be like, not just a little fantasy of waking up in the morning and, look, trees and nature, but I imagined what it would be like when it was really cold and raining, and when I needed to walk in 2 kilometers to wherever it was to have a shower and to buy my food all the time because I wouldn't have a car or whatever the situation was and the more and more I sat with this idea, the more and more I liked how it felt. And so at some point, it made complete sense for me to stop going into work because I had this alternative option. So my father had a caravan. I asked him if I could use it, and he said yes. And I bought the mattress and the knives and forks and cups and kettle and all of the things that I was going to need. It was ready, like really. I mean, everything was stocked, like in the caravan. And one morning or one evening, I unplugged my alarm clock, and I said, I'm going to wake up when I feel like waking up. And I did that. I actually woke up at a time which would allow me to go into work. And I don't feel like going into work. And so I didn't. And then I had the thought that said, divert your phone at work to your mobile. This was in 2002, something like that. So the internet wasn't that developed at that time. In fact, more 2001, I think, something like that. But we still could divert our phone to our mobiles at work. And there was a system in place, a night system, that allowed us to put orders in. I was a stockbroker at the time. Allowed us to put orders in at night. And so I started getting phone calls while at home from some clients. And some clients I couldn't deal with. What they needed was more complex than the system that I had at home would allow. And some people I could, so I started putting the orders in from home. And it was acceptable to me to take these phone calls when I was at home. It wasn't creating the internal conflict I had when I had to wake up and go to work. Anyway, 5 weeks later, I went into work to get something out of my desk. The first time I'd gone into work for five weeks. And when I was in the office, my boss saw me and he said, actually, where have you been? And I said, oh, I've been working from home. And he said, oh, okay, carry on, and walked off. And so what happened is that the people that I was dealing with, the clients I was dealing with, changed. My business changed. I was still generating enough income for the company to be satisfied. They weren't thrilled, but I wasn't losing them any money. Still making them just enough for them to be okay. And so what I thought was going to happen by not going into work didn't happen. I never had to go and live in the caravan. My business actually got much stronger than it was before. And it wasn't until 8 years later that I had the feeling, I don't feel like doing this anymore. And then that was when I stopped working in the industry completely. So hopefully the story demonstrates not that we have to become irresponsible, but that at some point this feeling inside that was driving me in the direction of this search for truth, search for knowing myself, told me what needed to be done. It became, when I say told me, the experience I had in life started to inform me. And at some point it was, I'm going to have to do this. It's important. It's so important. I have to do this. And what I thought would happen didn't happen. The outcome, not in my control. Ramesh would say, sometimes you get what you want, sometimes you don't get what you want, and sometimes you get much more than you want. And in this situation, what I ended up with was much more than what I wanted, but it required me to take this leap of faith. This isn't saying that you will always get much more than you want. I might have found myself fired from my job 2 days later. I might have found myself in the caravan, and I might have found that actually living in a caravan was completely different to the imagination that I had gone through for a month, and that I hated it, and that I then went back and had to find another job, and I found a job that was much worse than the job I had. All of those things can happen. But for me, what was important was to drop in and start following a deeper feeling. If you do go to work, one way of looking at it is that you're still doing what you feel like, or what you want to do. Because if you don't go to work, you won't have certain income. If you don't have certain income, you and your family won't have certain amenities. And so even though on one level you might feel tired and you might not feel like going to work on a biological level, if you throw everything else in the mix and you say, I understand that my happiness isn't to be found in pleasure, but I also understand that pleasure and pain are part of the flow of life, and to the extent that I can keep a roof over my family's head, keep us safe, that's important to me, understanding it's not my happiness, meaning it's not what defines me. And so if you look at that, you might say, overall, even though I'm tired, and if I look at just the tiredness aspect, I don't feel like going into work based on that. But overall, I want to go into work because I know what it delivers. So if you do that, if you're aware of that consciously, then what the mind is saying, oh, I don't feel like going into work, I don't want to do this, the other part of the mind will kick in and go, actually, I do want to do this. I feel tired, yes, but overall I want to do this. And you can see how attitudinally going into work then can change completely. You don't go in saying, I don't want to do this. You go, no, I've looked at it clearly, I do want to do this. And if your I do want to do this is based on an attachment to outcomes instead of a more balanced relationship to outcomes, then at some point the uncomfortableness will be there, strong enough that you make changes. So, thank you.